The river road to Constantinople was a gilded path paved with danger. For nearly 2 centuries, the Vikings of the north, the Rus, had known it well. A serpentine artery of trade and terror flowing south through the dense forests and wide steppes of what is now Russia and Ukraine. They came for the wealth of empires, rowing their clinker-built longships down the mighty Dnieper, dragging them over grueling portages where the rivers failed, past the lands of wary Slavic tribes and the ever-watchful nomadic horsemen of the Khazars. Their destination was a city of legend, known to them as Miklagard, the Great City, whose walls seemed to touch the clouds and whose riches were beyond the dreams of the northern fjords. But the journey was not merely one of plunder. It was a delicate, often violent, negotiation with the world's most powerful empires. And in the 10th century, as the political and spiritual map of Eurasia was being violently redrawn, a new and potent force entered this calculus, one emanating from the sun-baked caliphates of the Abbasid and Umayyad worlds. The story of the Vikings who fought for Islam is not one of a single dramatic conquest, but a slow, complex, and deeply personal migration of martial skill, woven from threads of silver, ambition, and the stark realities of exile. It begins not in the deserts of Arabia, but in the familiar chilling waters of the Baltic and the Volga. These Eastern Vikings, the Rus, were a different breed from their cousins raiding the monasteries of England and France. Their world was the river network, a sprawling aquatic highway that connected the Fronsen north to the warm, wealth-drenched seas of the south. Their primary currency was not Christian gold, but Arabic silver, vast quantities of it flowing north from the mints of Baghdad and Samarkand, paid for in furs, slaves, and amber. This ceaseless flow of dirhams created a profound economic symbiosis, but also a deep familiarity. Viking traders spent winters in Bulgar, a bustling Volga market, encountering Muslim merchants. Their faith, their customs, their codes of law and commerce. They saw the power of the Abbasid Caliphate, a spiritual and political empire that stretched from the Indus to the Iberian Peninsula, a rival to Constantinople in every conceivable way. For a Viking, a man whose identity was forged in the furnace of martial prowess and loyalty to a chieftain, this vast Islamic world presented not just a market, but a potential employer. The concept of the professional bodyguard, the mercenary company, was not alien to them. It was, in many ways, the natural extension of the komitasis, the warrior band bound by oath to a lord. Simultaneously, the Islamic world was undergoing its own period of profound transformation and fragmentation. The once unified caliphate was fracturing. In Spain, the Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba stood defiant. In North Africa, the Fatimid Caliphate was rising with Shia fervor, and in the heartlands, the Abbasid Caliphs in Baghdad were becoming increasingly puppeted by their own powerful creations. The slave soldier armies known as the Mamluks, and the Persian Buyid emirs who seized control of the empire's administration. This decentralization of power meant that ambitious regional rulers, emirs, and generals were in constant competition. They needed elite, fearsome, and crucially, politically detached warriors whose loyalty could be bought and would not be entangled in local tribal or dynastic feuds. Into this power vacuum walked the ultimate outsiders, the Vikings from the distant north, known in the east as the Saqaliba, a term that originally meant Slav, but came to encompass all fair-complexioned peoples from the northern frontiers. They were prized for their size, their ferocity in close combat, and their complete lack of ties to the Byzantine or Persian aristocratic networks that so often complicated politics. They were a blank slate upon which an emir could write his own security. The earliest whispers of this phenomenon come not from chronicles of great battles, but from the meticulous, often astonished, observations of Arab travelers and geographers. Fadlan, a sophisticated diplomat from the court of Baghdad, encountered a band of Rus traders on the Volga River in 922. His account is a masterpiece of anthropological observation, filled with visceral detail and palpable cultural shock. He describes them as perfect physical specimens, tall as date palms, ruddy complexioned, and covered in intricate dark green tattoos of trees and figures. He is horrified and fascinated by their ritualistic hygiene, their communal bowl, their frenzied funeral rites, involving the sacrificial death of a slave girl. But embedded within his disdain is a note of respect for their martial bearing. They are never without their weapons: axes, swords, long knives. Each man, in Fadlan notes, worships a god represented by a small wooden idol, but their primary faith seems to be placed in the power of the steel at their hip and the silver in their purse. They are men of contract, of temporary allegiance, driven by a tangible, immediate gain. This very quality made them perfect candidates for recruitment. A ruler did not need to convert their souls. He only needed to fill their hands with coin, and in return, their axes would fall where he commanded. It was a transaction stripped of ideology, a pure exchange of violence for wealth, and it was the foundational stone upon which the legend of the Guard of Silver would be built. The transition from trader-raider to professional guardsman was a natural, almost inevitable evolution, a shift from seasonal predation to steady, salaried employment. The Viking in the Islamic world ceased to be a fleeting terror on the riverbank and became an integrated, if still distinctive, fixture within the palace walls and military encampments. This integration followed the silver, tracing the roots of commerce and political ambition deep into the heart of the Caliphate and its splinter kingdoms. In the vast, heterogeneous world of medieval Islam, the Saqaliba became a specialized tool, a symbol of a ruler's reach and resources. They were living proof that his influence and his treasury could attract warriors from the very edge of the known world. Their presence was a statement, akin to an exotic animal in a menagerie or a masterpiece of calligraphy in a throne room, a possession that spoke of power, taste, and global connectivity. But unlike a caged leopard or a mounted gem, the Saqaliba were a tool with a will of their own, their loyalty a currency that required constant repayment. The earliest and perhaps most systematic employment of these northern warriors occurred in the very epicenter of the Islamic world, Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphs. By the 9th century, the Caliphs, increasingly wary of the power of their Khorasani and Turkish guards, saw in the Saqaliba a useful counterweight. These men, far from home and devoid of local kinship networks, offered a purer form of personal loyalty. They were installed as the Haris al-Kahasa, the Special Guard A unit tasked with the direct protection of the Caliph's person and palace. Their duties were intimate and critical, a testament to a fragile trust purchased with regular salaries of silver dirhams and the prestige of proximity to the commander of the faithful. They were the silent, towering shadows behind the throne, their alien features and unfamiliar tongue a barrier against the conspiracies whispered in Persian or Arabic in the corridors of power. Their value lay in their otherness. They could not easily be drawn into the complex webs of court intrigue because they stood outside the cultural and linguistic fabric that wove those webs together. But the model pioneered in Baghdad found its most fertile and enduring ground, not in the caliphal heartland, but on its farthest western fringe, the Iberian Peninsula in Al-Andalus, the Umayyad Emirate, and later Caliphate of Cordoba. The Saqaliba institution was elevated from a mere palace guard to a pillar of the state. The geography of Al-Andalus made it possible. While Vikings from the west raided the northern coasts of Spain, even sacking Seville in 84-4 and frightening the court in Cordoba, the primary route for recruitment was from the east. Emirs and caliphs maintained active slave trading networks that reached into the forests and river markets of the Rus, purchasing boys and young men who were then transported across the Mediterranean. These were not the hardened veteran traders described by Ibn Fadlan, but pliable youths, uprooted completely from their cultural context and brought into a system designed to erase and remake them. They were placed in rigorous training schools, educated in Arabic, instructed in the tenets of Islam, and drilled in the arts of war and administration. This process created not just soldiers, but a truly imported elite class, known collectively as the Saqaliba. Their whiteness, their origins, became a mark of their status, setting them apart from the local Berber, Arab, and Iberian populations. Under the powerful Caliph Abd al-Rahman III and his successor al-Hakam II, the Saqaliba of Cordoba reached the zenith of their influence. They were not confined to the guardroom. They became provincial governors, commanders of fleets and fortresses, heads of the royal workshops that produced the luxurious textiles and ivory carvings for which the caliphal court was famed, and even the keepers of the royal household. They were the ultimate civil servants, their loyalty theoretically unswerving, because it was owed solely to the caliph who had raised them from obscurity. A Saqaliba eunuch named Duri al-Sagir, for instance, served as the intimate chamberlain and treasurer of al-Hakam II, wielding immense soft power. Another, named Ghalib, became one of the most formidable military generals of the Caliphate, leading armies against Christian kingdoms in the north. This system functioned beautifully under a strong centralizing monarch. The Saqaliba were the perfect instrument of autocracy, a sword and a pen with no allegiance but to the hand that wielded them. Yet, this very purity of designed loyalty contained the seeds of its own betrayal. For when the hand that wielded them grew weak, the sword, now sophisticated in the ways of politics and administration, would not merely fall. It would seek a hand of its own to guide it. The paradox of the Saqaliba's existence was that in their journey from the periphery to the center of power, they ceased to be Vikings in any meaningful cultural sense. They traded Thor's hammer for the crescent, mead for sherbet, the Skald saga for the poet's Kasida. Yet, they retained a core identity forged in displacement and martial professionalism. They were a man-made tribe, bound not by blood, but by a shared origin story of abduction and retraining, and by their collective role as the outsider insiders of the Islamic West. Their power was entirely derivative, flowing from the Caliph. But as they amassed the trappings of that power, land, titles, wealth, prior armies, they began to develop interests of their own. The final stage of this evolution would not be one of continued service, but of stunning, catastrophic ambition. The Guard of Silver, having secured the throne for others, would begin to covet it for themselves. The system that created them as a perfect tool of control would, in its moment of crisis, find that the tool had grown too sharp and too heavy to hold. The fragility of a system built upon imported loyalty was exposed with terrifying speed in the final decades of the 10th century. The catalyst was the death of the powerful Caliph al-Hakam II in 976, which left the throne to his young son, Hisham II, in the court of Cordoba. A vacuum of such magnitude was not simply a political event. It was a seismic shock that cracked the very foundations of the state. The traditional power blocks, the Arab aristocracy, the Berber military clans, the scholarly and legal elites all stirred, seeing an opportunity to redirect the flow of patronage and influence. And at the center of this maelstrom stood the Saqaliba, no longer mere guards or functionaries, but a formidable interest group with control over the palace, the treasury, and the person of the child Caliph himself. Their leader was a man who embodied their ultimate ascent and their ultimate peril, Al-Mansur ibn Abi Amir, known to history as Al-Manzur. Al-Manzur was not a Saqaliba by birth. He was a member of the local Arab aristocracy, a brilliant and ruthless bureaucrat who had climbed the ranks of the administration. But his rise to absolute power was engineered through a masterful and cynical manipulation of the Saqaliba institution. Recognizing their military prowess and their political vulnerability, they had no popular base outside the palace. Al-Manzur made them the cornerstone of his personal army. He expanded their ranks further, lavished them with gifts and promotions, and directed their ferocity outward in a relentless series of razzias, or military campaigns, against the Christian north. For over 2 decades, Al-Mansur's armies, spearheaded by his Saqaliba regiments, marched almost annually, sacking Barcelona, Leon, and Santiago de Compostela, whose great church bells were carried back to Cordoba by Christian captives to be melted down into lamps for the great mosque. He became the de facto ruler of Al-Andalus, relegating Caliph Hisham II to a purely ceremonial figurehead, a prisoner of luxury in his own palace. In this period, the Saqaliba reached an apogee of military prestige, but a nadir of political independence. They were Almanzor's perfect instrument, their loyalty bought and their violence expertly channeled. He had become the ultimate patron, the sole source of their status and wealth, making them more dependent than ever. Yet, this dependence on a single mortal man was the fatal flaw. When Almanzor died in 102, the structure he had built, which bypassed all traditional institutions in favor of a personal dictatorship, propped up by slave soldiers and mercenaries, began to implode. His son, Abd al-Malik, managed to hold the precarious equilibrium for a few years, but upon his death in 108, the dam broke. The Saqaliba, now led by their own powerful commanders like Wada and Zuhair, were no longer willing to be mere instruments. They had seen the source of ultimate power up close for a generation. They had been the hand that wielded the sword. Now, in the chaos, they saw the opportunity to become the mind that directed it. What followed was a period known as the Fitna, or the Civil War of Al-Andalus, a devastating half-century of internecine conflict that would shatter the unified Caliphate of Cordoba into over 24 petty kingdoms, the Taifas. And in this bloody scramble for the remnants of empire, the Saqaliba were not just participants. They became kingmakers and ultimately kings. In the power vacuum, their control over the palace and the caliphal person became the ultimate political commodity. Different factions, Arabs, Berbers, Andalusis, vied for their support. The Saqaliba commanders, masters of the citadel and the treasury, began to play a deadly game, switching allegiances, murdering puppets, and installing new ones. The Caliphate became a grotesque parody of itself, with rival caliphs proclaimed and deposed in rapid, violent succession, each a pawn of the military bloc that could hold the palace complex of Madinat al-Zahra and its successor, Madinat al-Zahira. The final, logical step was taken not in Cordoba, but on the periphery of the collapsing state. Saqaliba generals who had been sent to govern distant provinces simply refused to let go. With their loyal regiments, their stockpiled wealth, and the habits of command ingrained over a lifetime, they carved out their own principalities. The most striking examples emerged on the Mediterranean coast. In Dania, a Saqaliba commander named Mujahid al-Amiri seized control, establishing a powerful maritime Taifa kingdom that would even launch raids on Sardinia. In the strategically vital city of Valencia, another Saqaliba ruler, Abd al-Aziz al-Mansur, grandson of Almanzor's right-hand man, founded a dynasty. These were no longer guards or mercenaries. They were sovereigns, emirs who minted their own coins, patronized their own courts, and conducted their own foreign policy. The tool had finally taken possession of the workshop. This transformation from slave soldier to sovereign represents one of the most profound and ironic reversals in medieval history. The very qualities that made the Vikings turned Saqaliba attractive to the Caliphs of Baghdad and Cordoba, their disconnection, their military professionalism, their pliability, became in the end the instruments of the empire's fragmentation. They were the ultimate mercenaries, and their loyalty, while fierce, was conditional and transactional. When the central treasury could no longer pay, or when the central authority could no longer command, the transaction ended. The Guard of Silver had been paid to protect a throne. In the absence of a credible paymaster, they found it more profitable to own the throne room itself. Their story is not one of cultural conquest, but of a stark, pragmatic assimilation into the power structures of the medieval Islamic world, followed by a consummation of that assimilation through the logic of sheer force. They ceased to be Norsemen, but in becoming Saqaliba kings, they fulfilled the Viking Age ethos of seeking wealth and lordship by the sword. albeit in a world of citrus groves and courtyards under an Iberian sun. The twilight of the Saqaliba as a distinct political force in Al-Andalus was as protracted and intricate as their rise. The Taifa kingdoms, those fragments of the broken Caliphate, engaged in a constant shifting ballet of alliance and betrayal, each minor king desperately trying to outmaneuver his neighbors while parrying the growing threat from the resurgent Christian north. The Saqaliba rulers of Denia, Valencia, and the Balearic Islands were full participants in this dance, their courts becoming centers of a refined, anxious culture where poetry and political assassination were often two sides of the same coin. Yet, their power remained inherently precarious. Built on a narrow base, they lacked the deep-rooted tribal connections of the Berber taifas like Granada, or the venerable aristocratic lineages of the Arab taifas like Seville. Their legitimacy was purely de facto, derived from military control and wealth, not from genealogy or religious authority. This made them both ruthlessly pragmatic and profoundly vulnerable. To sustain their rule, they often became voracious taxers of their subjects and enthusiastic employers of yet more mercenaries, including, in a final historical twist, Christian knights from the north, creating a mirror image of their own ancestors' journey. The end came not with a dramatic revolt from within their own cities, but from the relentless pressure of a reunifying force that saw the Taifa system as both an opportunity and an affront. That force was the Almoravids, a puritanical Berber movement born in the deserts of North Africa, who crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 1086 at the desperate invitation of several Taifa kings facing the onslaught of Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile. The Almoravids, with their austere religious zeal and formidable Saharan military discipline, viewed the sophisticated, fractious, and compromise-riddled world of the Taifas with contempt. After defeating the Christians at the Battle of Sagrajas, they turned their attention to what they saw as the source of Al-Andalus' weakness, its divided, secular rulers. One by one, the Taifa kingdoms were annexed, their palaces occupied, their treasuries seized. The Saqaliba kingdoms, with their reliance on purchased loyalty and their lack of a populist or religious base, fell swiftly. Denia was absorbed around 121. Valencia held out a little longer, through a complex saga involving the legendary Castilian knight El Cid, but ultimately succumbed to the Almoravid tide in 1102. The political experiment of the slave king was over, its brief, brilliant fluorescence extinguished by a movement that derived its power from the very things the Saqaliba lacked: mass religious solidarity and ethnic cohesion. Yet, to declare the story of the Vikings in Islamic service over with the fall of the last Iberian Taifa is to miss its quieter, more enduring echoes. The phenomenon of the northern warrior in the Muslim world was not confined to the Western Mediterranean. It was a recurring pattern wherever the geographical and commercial circles of the two worlds intersected. In the east, the connection persisted along the Great River Road that had first brought the Rus into contact with the Caliphate. The Volga Bulgars and the Khazars had long employed Norse mercenaries, and this tradition filtered deeper into the Islamic sphere. There are fragmentary references in later sources, such as the 11th century Persian chronicler Amarvazi, who wrote of the Rus being used as guards in the frontier regions of Khorasan, suggesting that the employment of northern fighters continued in the Persianate world well after the Iberian chapter had closed. The model of using alien, professional soldiers was, after all, a central feature of Islamic military policy, culminating in the Mamluk system that would later rule Egypt and Syria for centuries. While the Mamluks were primarily drawn from the Kipchak Turkic steppes, the underlying principle, recruiting, training, and emancipating slave soldiers from pagan peripheries to serve as a loyal Praetorian guard, was directly analogous to the Saqaliba experiment. The Vikings were, in a sense, a prototype, an early and vivid example of a martial resource that could be tapped from the distant north. Furthermore, the cultural and genetic legacy of these journeys is etched, however faintly, into the historical record. The flow of Arabic silver dirhams into Scandinavia, which funded chieftains and built trade towns like Burqa and Hedeby, was the direct economic result of this relationship. In the opposite direction, the material culture of the Islamic world found its way into Norse graves. A figurine of the Buddha from northern India found in Helgö, Sweden, intricate silk textiles from Byzantium or the Caliphates, and of course the countless coins bearing Kufic script, pierced and worn as jewelry by women in Viking Age Denmark. These are the silent artifacts of a profound and sustained connection. On a human level, while mass conversion in Scandinavia was still centuries away, individual Vikings who entered Islamic service undoubtedly embraced their new faith and culture, their genetic lineages dissolving into the populations of Anatolia, the Caucasus, and the Iberian Peninsula. A recent genetic study of modern populations in the region of Murcia in Spain, for instance, showed unexpected Scandinavian haplogroups, a possible, whisper-thin biological echo of those Saqaliba guards or their descendants who settled and integrated long after their kingdoms had fallen. The final, poignant legacy lies in the realm of myth and memory. In the Norse sagas written down centuries later in Iceland, there are persistent tales of a distant, wealthy land to the south or east, sometimes called Sörkland, the land of the Saracens. These stories are fantastical, filled with dragons and magic, but they are rooted in the real economic and human pathways of the Viking Age. They speak of journeys to obtain silks and spices, of encounters with powerful kings, of service in foreign armies. While the sagas overwhelmingly focus on the adventures in the Christian West and the explorations of the North Atlantic, these fleeting references to the Islamic world are like fragments of a lost mosaic, hinting at a parallel history that was known, if not centrally remembered, in the Norse world. Conversely, in the Arab historical and geographical tradition, the Rus and Saqaliba remained a subject of fascination, a description of a people from the land of cold and darkness who were formidable, filthy, brave, and ultimately useful. They were categorized, analyzed, and marveled at, a testament to the vast, interconnected medieval world that stretched from the Arctic Circle to the Arabian Desert. The story of the Vikings who fought for Islam is, therefore, not a footnote, but a crucial chapter in understanding the fluidity of the medieval world. It dismantles the simplistic image of a clash of civilizations and replaces it with a far more nuanced picture of negotiation, employment, and assimilation. These men were not holy warriors for a foreign god, nor were they traitors to their origins. They were professionals of violence, navigating a world where religious boundaries were often more permeable than political ones, where identity could be as much a matter of occupation as of birth. Their journey from the fjords to the fortresses of Cordoba and the palaces of Baghdad is a story of human mobility and adaptation at its most extreme. It reveals the dark logic of mercenary loyalty, a loyalty that could build an empire's guard and then shatter its throne. A loyalty that was always, ultimately, to the silver in the hand and the opportunity it represented. They began as feared raiders from the edge of the map and ended as kings and courtiers in the very center of civilized power, only to vanish into the tides of history, leaving behind coins in northern soil, strange words in old texts, and the indelible truth that the medieval world was both far larger and far more intimately connected than we often imagine. To truly grasp the scale and significance of this cross-cultural exchange, one must look beyond the chronicles of kings and the fall of dynasties, to the quieter, more pervasive evidence etched into the landscape and lodged in the very dirt of history. The legacy of the Norse in the Islamic world, and the reciprocal influence flowing north, is perhaps most tangibly felt not in grand narratives of betrayal or conquest, but in the silent language of archaeology, in the meticulous records of commerce. Each silver dirham unearthed from a Scandinavian hoard, each fragment of exotic textile preserved in the acidic soil of a Norse grave, each gene strand that traces an unexpected path, speaks to a daily reality of contact that was sustained, systematic, and transformative for both ends of the earth it connected. The sheer volume of Islamic silver that flooded into Scandinavia between the 9th and 11th centuries is staggering, amounting to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of coins. These were not mere curiosities. They formed the very bedrock of the Viking Age economy in the East. In places like Gotland, an island in the Baltic Sea, hoards containing thousands of Kufic dirhams are common, buried, and never retrieved, a testament to both immense wealth and profound instability. The coins arrived in cycles, their mint dates and inscriptions allowing modern archaeologists to map the ebb and flow of trade routes with astonishing precision. They tell a story of shifting political fortunes in the Caliphate, a new mine opened in Afghanistan, a civil war in Samarkand, and that disrupted the flow, the rise of a new dynasty in the Caucasus that controlled a key mountain pass. Every political tremor in Central Asia or the Middle East reverberated in the market squares of Situna or Hedeby, influencing the price of furs and slaves, the power of local chieftains, and the very decision of whether to launch a trading voyage or a raid. The silver was often melted down into ingots or hack silver, its elegant Arabic script sheared off, but its metallic purity, the reason it was sought in the first place, remained, fueling the artistic flourishing of the Norse world in the form of ornate jewelry, weapon embellishments, and the patronage of craftsmen. Beyond coinage, the material evidence paints a picture of selective adoption and cultural curiosity. In Norse graves, particularly those of High Snow's women, archaeologists have found fragments of silk woven with intricate patterns that originated in Byzantine or Islamic workshops. These were not practical goods for the cold north. They were luxury items, symbols that spoke of connections to a wider, more sophisticated world. A woman buried with a piece of Samite silk from the eastern Mediterranean was making a statement about her family's reach and prestige. Similarly, objects like the famous glass beaker from Hedeby or the carved ivory chess pieces influenced by Islamic designs found in the British Isles show how artistic motifs and technologies traveled along these human and commercial networks. The transfer was not entirely one way. Norse weaponry, particularly the finely pattern-welded swords, were highly prized commodities in the East, likely ending up in the arsenals of emirs and caliphs. Amber from the Baltic coast, a substance believed to have magical and medicinal properties, found its way to Baghdad and Cairo, mentioned in pharmacopoeias and treasured in royal collections. The human legacy is, by its nature, more elusive but no less significant. The Saqaliba who rose to power in Al-Andalus, men like Mujahid of Dinaya or the rulers of Valencia, would have married local women, their descendants blending into the Iberian population within a few generations. Their distinct physical appearance, so often remarked upon by Arab chroniclers, would have faded, but their familial lines may have persisted in the local aristocracy of the Levante region for centuries. On a broader demographic scale, the slave trade that fed the Saqaliba system was a vast, grim engine of human displacement. It transported not only Norse and Slavic boys, but also people from the Baltic and Finnic regions deep into the heart of the Mediterranean world. This constant, slow drip of Northern European genetics into the populations of North Africa, Sicily, and the Iberian Peninsula contributed to the complex genetic tapestry of Southern Europe, a fact now being slowly illuminated by modern paleogenetics. These studies sometimes find Y-chromator lineages common in Scandinavia or the Baltic states appearing in populations in Spain and Italy, silent biological witnesses to journeys that began in capture or ambition and ended in assimilation. In the literary memory of both cultures, the encounter left a deep, if stylized, impression. For the Islamic world, the Vikings remained a subject of ethnographic interest. Beyond Ibn Fadlan's visceral account, later geographers like Al-Idrisi would continue to describe the northern lands, their climate, their resources, and their inhabitants, often recycling and embellishing earlier observations. The Rus were consistently portrayed as formidable, unclean, and excessively devoted to their king, a stereotype that, while simplistic, acknowledged their primary role as seen from the south, that of the ultimate royal guardsmen and merchants of violence. In the Norse world, the memory was more fragmented, filtered through the lens of saga literature composed in 13th century Iceland, a world away in both time and space from the Volga trade routes. Yet, it persists. The sagas speak of heroes traveling to Miklagard, Constantinople, to join the Virnjar, the Varangian Guard, which was a predominantly Norse force in Byzantine service. While this is a different stream of the Eastern diaspora, the cultural memory of Southern service is clear. More tantalizing are the references to Sirkland, often a vague, fantastical place of deserts, dragons, and immense wealth to the south, where heroes might go to win fame and fortune. This mythical land is a hazy, legendary refraction of the very real Caliphates, a place where the historical reality of trade, service, and cultural exchange had been transformed into the stuff of epic, its specific Islamic character blurred, but its core promise of exotic wealth and perilous adventure intact. Thus, the final truth of the Vikings in Islamic service transcends the specific stories of the Guard of Silver or the Saqaliba kings. It reveals the medieval world as a system of astonishing connectivity, where the demand for a specialized commodity, whether it be silver, fur, slaves, or martial skill, could create durable bridges across continents and civilizations. These bridges were not built on mutual understanding or philosophical exchange, but on pragmatic need and mutual benefit. They were maintained by the cold calculus of trade and the hard currency of military service. In traversing these bridges, individuals were transformed, cultures were subtly altered, and histories became inextricably linked. The Norse warrior who ended his days as an emir in a sun-drenched Spanish citadel, praying in Arabic and listening to Andalusian poetry, had traversed a greater distance than any mere geography could measure. His journey, and the journeys of thousands like him, stands as a powerful testament to the fluidity of identity in an age often painted in the stark colors of religious warfare and ethnic division. It is a story not of a clash, but of a long, complex, and deeply human conversation conducted in the shared languages of commerce and the sword, whose echoes still resonate in the coins we dig up, the stories we tell, and the blood that flows largely unremembered in our veins.